Young people are dying. They're overdosing on heroin and fentanyl. You wonder, how did this young person get to this horrible spot in life? Let's turn back the clock. Go back in time, to younger days, to understand how addiction starts, to understand how to prevent it from happening. While each addiction situation is different, there are generally 3 ingredients. First, teens have a lot to cope with. Many teenagers are trying to figure out, who am I? What is my identity? And there is stress. When teens were asked, they said the number one reason they used drugs was to deal with the pressures and stress of school. And some teens have to cope with stress at home. There could be emotional neglect, abuse, divorce, a family member with an illness, a family member who is addicted, the death of a loved one, money troubles, or other challenges. Many teens also need to cope with depression or social anxiety. In addition to a lot to cope with, some teenagers, through no fault of their own, have poor coping skills. Maybe their parent or parents have been caught up in their work or other family crises and do not even realize that their teenage child needs help. Maybe their parent or parents are struggling themselves and are simply not able to teach their kids how to constructively cope with life. And teens who experience day-to-day depression or social anxiety may develop an unwarranted negative self-image. This can make it tougher to cope. The third ingredient to addiction that may be present is certain brain chemistry. Some people, by virtue of how their brain processes chemicals, get hooked easier. You can attribute this to your family tree, otherwise known as genetics. Genetic susceptibility doesn't have to be present for a teen to develop addiction, but it can increase their chances. All 3 of these pieces do not have to be present for addiction to happen. Any one piece, if strong enough, can lead a teen down the addiction path. So how does addiction start? Here's what happens. A teen has a lot to cope with and poor coping skills. They try alcohol and drugs. Maybe their brain chemistry causes them to be more susceptible. The teen's brain learns that, at least in the short term, the alcohol or drugs gives them a way to temporarily neglect or forget the stresses in their life, which is a flawed way of coping. That can become their identity. The party friend who is willing to try anything, or the friend who can get you drugs. It might give them a way to fit in socially and have fun. It might help them for a moment forget about their stress. The teen starts using alcohol or drugs more frequently. This is where things come apart. Repeated use does 3 things. The teen's brain has learned that, in the short term, alcohol and drugs can help them cope. With repeated use, this bad learning loop becomes ingrained and deeper. The teenager gets to the point of automatically reaching for alcohol or drugs when they're stressed, without even thinking about it. With repeated use, the chemicals in alcohol and drugs also change the brain, making the teenager even less self-aware of how they're going off the rails. And repeated use makes life situations worse, which just increases stress and feeds into the negative loop. Without a change, this path ends in addiction, jail, or death. 1 out of 10 adults struggle with addiction. Addiction leads to broken families, broken promises, and broken hearts, and currently an increasing number of deaths. So how do we prevent this from happening? How do we prevent addiction? Here's how. First, a message for parents. Spend concentrated one-on-one time with your kids, particularly when they get into middle school and all through high school and college. Truly listen to them with love and without judgment. Understand what they are coping with. Help them get through. If you need help, talk to an experienced professional. Do not wait. Act now. And remember, your child could simply be experimenting and have a brain more susceptible to alcohol and drugs. It could be that simple and scary. Or your child could be going through something that you're not fully aware of. There is inevitably a lot going through their head. When you get in a car accident in the wintertime, the accident doesn't happen when you hit the telephone pole. It happens 200 feet before that when you start skidding on the ice. Your child may be skidding right now, and neither they nor you even recognize it. Act now. Do not assume they can self-correct. They need an established support system. Listen to them and help them immediately. Now, a message for teenagers. You are not alone. It may feel that way. Who else could be going through this or having these thoughts? But whatever you're experiencing, many others have experienced this too, and they've come out happy on the other end. Do not take on the identity of the party friend. It will kill you. You can find an identity without drug and alcohol dependency. Your true identity, a better identity. Finally, be open to receiving help from your family, a friend, or from a professional, wherever it comes from. When your body has an illness, you see a doctor. When your body has an injury, you see a physical therapist. But what about your brain? When you're on a bad path, a therapist can help you get on a positive one. The therapist can help you step back, gain perspective, and develop strong coping skills no matter what life throws your way, like a personal trainer for the brain. Getting help is a strength, not a weakness. You deserve to be truly happy. You deserve to be comfortable with your own thoughts. You can be. Peace and love.
Hello. So continuing on a similar note, when there is an addict in the family and he or she is trying to fight their addiction, when they're trying to fight their addiction, there's always codependence as well. The family tends to suffer a lot more than the addict themselves. They tend to be socially isolated by the society, by their neighbors, by their friends and relatives. They tend to isolate themselves to, protect the addict and to make sure a steady recovery. There is financial burden as well, because getting out of addiction is financially straining with the medication and the rehab centers and everything. At the same time, there's a lot of stigma as well around it. For the family itself, family tends to neglect their own care to provide everything for the addict. They tend to themselves suffer depression and anxiety without even knowing at a lot of times. They themselves develop a lot of mental health issues and a lot of post-traumatic stress disorders because of looking at their loved ones suffer throughout. When we talk about stigma attached to addicts and their families, there's always discrimination that they face throughout. For example, when we see an addict, most of the time they're isolated by their family as well as by their loved ones. So there is always a discrimination from our side when we differentiate saying us versus them. Right? We are better out from them. That's the problem that we want to break. How stigma works is when we continue this us versus them, there's always lower social status for the ones who are addicts, which leads to discrimination and labeling, and then they're stereotyped into a particular category. So we need to focus on breaking these barriers to help them cope up and show them support so that they can get out of it with our support. There is cultural stigma through which they are shamed and guilted through continuously. Then there is also fear of judgment. Addicts tend to face fear of judgment, because of which they don't want to address the problem and they do not want to seek help. We should as a society and as a community open ourselves to a point where everyone feels free to talk to us and they do not feel discriminated or put down because of the stigma attached. And also because addiction as itself has a lot of misconceptions around it, thinking that addiction is a habit and it's a morality issue, whereas it is not. Just like, for example, diabetes, it's not a morality issue that a person has diabetes or cancer. It's a disease. They are not able to cope up with it. They need proper treatment. And this lack of awareness in us as well as in the society itself leads to a lot of problems for the addict to seek help. there are different pathways to recover. Some of them are mentioned here. First would be rehabilitation centers, where they are provided with proper psychological and mental care and medications continuously to help them recover with support of the people who are also going through the same issues, through which they support the group as well as move forward. Second would be support groups. After rehabilitation centers, after going through the whole process of rehabilitation, we tend to ask them to join AA and NA meetings, which is Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings, depending on their addiction. And we have representatives from that who would be speaking in the second half as well with about their 12-step recovery program and how it works. So in these programs help them form a community and support so that there is easy recovery. And the last would be holistic approach by using activities like meditation, yoga, or games, or everything else as an approach to get out of rehabilitation and addiction. There's a need of when we recognize the signs of addictions and when we go for early interventions, it helps the addict itself to recover sooner, and it helps them to build resilience to cope up with that particular addiction so that they can move forward with their life and leave this behind. For rehabilitation, for anyone who seeks help, I would request you to note it down for your use or your family members' use or a peer group who would need them, as an awareness for you, and so that you can spread this awareness further as well. So, Mind Care Rehab is located nearby this college. It's within the 2-kilometer radius. So, here we provide help for anyone who seeks it. There's always free consultation 24/7. Anyone who wants it, they can walk in or contact us on the number given on the slide. Thank you very much, and I would like to welcome back your host.